Ladies and gentlemen, can you please welcome our first guest, Mr. Michael Liebreich.
Thank you very much, Holly. Thank you also to Graham and his team. What an amazing event. I don't think I've heard whooping and hollering at an energy conference ever before. And what a great introduction. I'm always a bit worried when people introduce me as a former Olympic skier, I mean, particularly in Canada, where you have Olympic gold medalists. And the reason is that, they're saying, well, how did he do? Do you think he won anything? Do you think he got a medal? So I was on the British ski team. So moving right along, what I hope to do, I'm here in Calgary, in Alberta. A lot of the wealth here, a lot of everything that we see around us, that you've built, is from the oil and gas industry. I get it. We all get it. We have to acknowledge that. When we use words like disruptors, it all sounds great, and it's a fabulous and inspiring entree that we've had. But who's being disrupted? Who's disrupting? It can also sound very threatening. So one of the things I want to do is try to give you a shared vocabulary so that there are people in this room, I'm sure, who are feeling threatened. I've been here for less than 2 days, and I can hear some of the angst about the trends in energy and politics. And there's also people in the room who are forward-looking, they want to innovate, they want to be entrepreneurial, but they are not in the dialogue that we need, and hence this event, Energy Disruptors. So if I can give a bit of a shared dialogue, shared vocabulary, if I can then take you through some of the trends, some of the things that are really happening, data-driven. The company I founded, New Energy Finance, is a data and information provider. I'm an engineer, I'm a scientist. Data matters. And then we'll talk about some of the implications, perhaps, right at the end. I'll kick off the discussion that you'll continue through the 2 days about implications for this great city and for this great region. So let me start. I tried to imagine those sort of two types of people, the extremes, let's call it. People who might be oil and gas through and through, entrepreneurial, but perhaps threatened by some of the trends and not entirely committed to transitioning away from oil and gas, which is providing their livelihood, their wealth. One statement at that extreme, and another statement then from somebody coming from the other side of things. So let's see. Do you agree with this? The world simply cannot shift to a clean energy and transportation future. We need to stop listening to so-called experts who say we can avoid catastrophic climate change by eliminating fossil fuels. Engineers are smart and love solving problems, but here's the thing. We still need electricity when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. Wind and solar power can be really cheap, but only if you ignore their subsidies and hidden costs. Coal and gas are the best way to provide universal energy access. Electric vehicles will remain a niche technology. You have to be in denial to believe battery costs and EV charging times will plummet. We'll still be dependent on fossil fuels in 50 years, and there's no way the world can really shift to a clean energy and transportation future. It's a pretty extreme position, but there may be people out there who find that that sums up where we are. The second statement, let's see if you agree with this. The world really can shift to a clean energy and transportation future, and there's no way we'll still be dependent on fossil fuels in 50 years. Battery costs and EV charging times will plummet. You have to be in denial to believe electric vehicles will remain a niche technology. Coal and gas are the best way to provide universal energy access, but only if you ignore their subsidies and hidden costs. Wind and solar can produce really cheap power. We still need electricity when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, but here's the thing. Engineers are smart and love solving problems. We can avoid catastrophic climate change by eliminating fossil fuels. We need to stop listening to so-called experts who say the world simply cannot shift to zero carbon energy and transportation. Now, what's the point? The point is, those two extreme positions are not helpful. Neither of them is correct. And if we adhere to them, we will not disrupt anything. In fact, we will be disrupted. You will be disrupted by Stavanger or Riyadh or Aberdeen or Houston. So one of the purposes of the next few days is to come together to examine those two bookends and achieve some form of unity and consensus. There's an enormous amount of news out there. You know, if you read the news, you would think that we're going to be all using solar power and wind and that's it in a very short period of time. Is that what the future looks like? Electric vehicles, more news, this city banning it, this country banning it, launching models. Is that real? Or is the real future this? A great Canadian, Václav Smil, the great hope for a quick and sweeping transition to renewable energy is wishful thinking. Where we are headed, really, is what I call the three-third world. 1/3 of electricity by 2040 will be wind and solar, variable, very cheap. 1/3 of cars and light trucks on the roads, not in the showrooms, but on the roads, will be electric. And the global economy will be 1/3 more energy efficient. I'm not saying this is a normative statement where I'd like to be. I'm just saying this is the environment that you are going to go out and innovate and disrupt in. You have to understand and accept this is your environment. Let's start with electricity. So I started New Energy Finance in 2004 because there was very poor data. Nobody even knew how much was being invested in these clean energy solutions. Renewables, energy efficiency, carbon capture and storage, power storage, and so on. And I started to track it, and I built a team. And what we found was that it grew very quickly. In 2004, we got $95 billion. It grew to around 350 billion, and then it kind of went flat. The last 8 years, it's been averaging $300 billion per year. Renewable energy capacity installed has continued to grow. 36 gigawatts at the beginning of that period, 175 gigawatts. Remember, a gigawatt is about one big power station, that sort of growth. So if you look back at history, you can see that there was a period of spend more, get more. And you could even say, subsidize more, get more. If you wanted more clean energy, you just found somebody to pay for it or forced them. But then there's this very interesting second period of history. Spend the same and get more and more. And that's the period that we're currently in. Why has that happened? Cost reductions. The experience curve is not a law of nature, it's a law of microeconomics. And it holds. The costs of clean energy technologies, all of them have come down very steeply as experience grows. It's a feature of clean energy. This is not resource economics. This is one of the reasons why traditional economists have missed this, because this is about industrial microeconomics. This is material science. This is manufacturing. This is software. So you've got learning rates of, for solar, 24 to 28%, for wind, 19%. Every time the industry doubles, the costs drop by those amounts. Solar, We've seen the costs come down since 1975 by 300 times, and the volume up by 200,000 times. What do you think is going to happen next? Wind. When I started New Energy Finance, that turbine that you can see there on the right, 4 megawatts, that was the biggest turbine that existed. What happened since? 7 megawatts, 9 megawatts, 13 to 15 megawatts on the drawing board, ready to be built within the next decade, well within the next decade. So my mum doesn't actually know what I do. And I showed her some of this. She's 87. And she follows perfectly, and she's like, wow, that is a big, big turbine you're talking about there. She said, but I don't understand. Why would you build it in front of the Shard in London? So what has that done to those costs? 2011, the only question was, when are you going to be grid competitive? Because the cost of solar was 17 US cents per kilowatt hour, levelized. No subsidies, but levelized. Wind, 8 cents. Similar to power from gas in much of the world. Offshore wind, 17 cents, still expensive. 2015. Right? Remember, this is just 4 years later, just 3 years ago. Wind and solar at 6 cents. Grid competitive pretty much anywhere in the world. Offshore wind still more expensive. Now, onshore wind and solar sub 2 US cents per kilowatt hour. Offshore wind, 5 cents. Now, these are record prices, okay? And I get it. Not every project, if you do solar up here, it's not going to be the same as solar in Mexico, solar in Morocco. Fine. But what we see is that these record prices become the median price within just a few years. We've seen it again and again, and it will continue to happen because of the experience curve. 2 cents per kilowatt hour is not grid competitive. It's killing any other technology being connected to the grid. This is the cheapest electricity ever produced from a new source, newly developed project, the cheapest electricity ever from any technology in the history of electricity. That's renewable energy today. It's not a question of whether you like it or don't like it, it's data. And it's growing really, really fast, not surprisingly. Because cost reductions are driven by doublings, the experience curve, not by major finds of new resources, doublings matter. This is like flat screen TVs. It's that sort of economics. Doublings matter. Wind. 5 doublings in 17 years, a doubling about every 3 years. Solar. 8 doublings in 17 years. Like I say, what do you think is going to happen next? Now, this has gone much faster than conventional economists have expected. I have really good friends, really, really good friends who work at the IEA, the International Energy Association. And they hate when I do this, but they have to admit that it's data. Go back to 2002, and they forecast the growth in wind installations, cumulative. And that was, you can see there, that's the growth. What happened next? 14 times in a row, they had to increase their forecasts. They said they're not forecasts, they're scenarios. Whatever. If you're making decisions in your industry and you need a picture of what the future looks like, this is not helpful. I said I'm an engineer. Let's do some differential equations, right? Let's take the first derivative of this. That's cumulative installations. What about annual installations? Right? How much did they think was going to be installed every year? The rate of installation, not the cumulative. And that's what it was in 2002. Every single year, they think that this industry has stalled and will go flat. And every single year, they're wrong. That was wind. Solar. Let's speed up a bit. Let's differentiate at the same time. On the left, cumulative. On the right, installation rates. Last year, 2017, they said the industry was pretty much maxed out at 70 gigawatts. Before the end of the year, that industry had installed nearly 100 gigawatts of solar capacity. There are single companies in the solar industry planning to expand capacity to 40 gigawatts a year of manufacturing. Single companies. Conventional economists think that that's going to be 60% of the whole market. They're wrong. By the way, it's not just the IEA. In the US, there's the EIA, the Energy Information Agency, part of the Department of Energy. The same chart for solar, the US version. It's even worse. An industry that installed 100 gigawatts last year, according to them, is likely to install only 25 to 30 gigawatts at any point through to 2040. Can you use this to run your business? This information, you cannot. Some people seem very upset about all of this. There's Bjorn Lomborg. Solar and wind is taking over the world. We hear it all the time, only it's wrong. It's 0.6% of primary energy. And in 2040, it'll be 2. Primary energy is 68% thermal waste. Who cares about primary energy? Wind and solar is electricity. That 0.6 is a year or so old data. It's now 0.8% of primary energy. But so what? It's 5.2% of electricity in 2016. That's already 2 years ago, and you've seen the growth rates. If you look at it in 2040, the IEA, consistently conservative, says it's going to 20%. Bloomberg New Energy Finance says it's going to 34%. 1/3 of our electricity by 2040 will be variable. It'll be wind and it'll be solar. The investment, $10 trillion, big number. $10 trillion will be spent on generating capacity. 6 trillion with a T, will be spent on wind and solar between now and 2040. Nuclear, 1.4 trillion, but only if it gets its act together. It's going to be difficult to manage. One example, California, go back to 2012. A little bit of wind, a little bit of solar. Pretty easy to manage. Long lunches, home early on Fridays, right? Today, this is the duck curve. There you can see one duck after another for those who follow these things. The solar is starting to eat that midday peak. It makes the evening peak very, very peaky. Very difficult to manage. 2030, this is California's own integrated resource plan. If that isn't an advert for low-cost batteries, I don't know what is. So it's going to be a challenge to manage it, because the grid has to clear in real time, long-term, months to weeks, seasonally, days and hours. You get a bad weather forecast for tomorrow, that's not an excuse for a power cut. Minutes to seconds, voltage fluctuations. Luckily, engineers are smart. I said it right at the beginning. They innovate, and there are plenty of approaches to dealing with that fluctuation and variability. Interconnectors, pumped storage, this is all happening. This is all happening. There are other opportunities. These are some of the innovative, short-term balancing type technologies, flywheels, gravity systems, compressed air, and so on. Longer term is more difficult. Seasonal storage, we'll come back to, is more difficult. You've got to get into chemicals, biofuels, hydrogen, ammonia, and so on, power to gas, or very long-distance interconnectors. But this is not a showstopper. Engineers are smart. And where this is done around the world, the costs of this are manageable. Some countries paying a lot for renewable energy because they installed lots before those costs came down. That's not this problem. This is a problem that can be solved in a cost-effective way. And it has to be digital. All that variability, everything moving around, you can only do it if everything is digital. Sensors everywhere. Let's talk about vehicles, because they help. We saw there, one of the ways you'll manage variability is batteries, electric vehicles. 1/3 of the vehicles on our road will be cars and light trucks. Electric vehicles. I know we've got a bunch of Teslas there, and we've got the robo-car and so on. So we're all big fans, or are we? Here, this is drawn to scale the current number of electric vehicles in the world's transport fleet. That's the not electric vehicles, drawn to scale. And there may be some people who turned up in a vehicle like that this morning, I don't know. So again, I get it. I know where I am, I know what people drive. But I am very bullish electric vehicles. Why? Here you see, you can see the half of new sales, more than half of new sales by 2040. You can see there 1/3 of all vehicles on the road to be electric. Again, it's mainly, one of the main reasons, the experience curve. The battery costs that have come down 70% since 2011 or 12 are going to go down another 70% by 2030. Right now, for most users, an unsubsidized electric vehicle is no more expensive than internal combustion engine. Total cost of ownership, maintenance, fuel, etc. Right now. By 2025, the sticker price will be lower. The upfront cost will be lower. What do you think people are going to buy? You walk in a showroom, internal combustion, electric. The electric accelerates faster, it's quieter, it's more connected, it's safer, it's got lower maintenance costs. What do you think? But it's also this. Dieselgate, air quality. Doesn't matter everywhere in the world, but I'll tell you it matters in Europe, and I'll tell you it matters in Asia. That's Shanghai, Hong Kong, Delhi. That's a honeymoon they'll remember. Mexico City, Sao Paulo, Los Angeles, Paris, Madrid, London. I'm on the board of Transport for London. I am shamed when I see that picture. Model availability. We've not seen anything yet. We've seen announcements, vaporware, a few models. By 2020, whatever type of vehicle you want, there will be an electric version with a decent range. We've seen 63% compound annual growth rate in sales, but that's tiny when you see that little, remember that little red car? It's so small, who cares? It's growing fast, who cares? I tell you what, geometric growth matters, because it creeps up on you and suddenly it's all over you, and it drives down those costs. Last year, for the first time, there was 1 million electric vehicles sold worldwide. Do you know how many they'll sell in China alone this year? 1 million, more or less. This thing's going really, really fast. And it's not just cars. It's not just cars. Most of the coverage is cars, and this thing, that's the Tesla Semi. I can't pronounce that properly, I'm English. But is it just vaporware from Tesla? Sorry, respect, but something that might launch in 2020, 2022, we don't know the range. Is it just these things, little delivery robots and no. It's proper delivery vans. Vans you can buy today to do deliveries that are the same price on a cost of ownership basis, and you don't contribute to the air quality issues, so the mayors love it. And you can buy them today. And it's not just little vans. It's bigger trucks today available. The blue one I helped launch in London. That's the Daimler Fuso, 7.5 tons. It's completely silent. That UPS, that's by a company called Arrival. You've seen the robo-car. You want the robo-car, there's not much you can do with it, right? You can't even sit on it. Same company, and Lucas is here, he's one of the speakers. Same company makes these things for UPS. UPS is buying them today. And it's not just delivery, distribution, it's garbage trucks. It's buses. Do you know how many school buses there are in the US? 480,000. Do they use oil-based fuel currently? They do. Chinese buses. China has been buying over 100,000 buses every year. I'm very proud. London has the biggest electric bus fleet in Europe, 120 buses. Shenzhen has 16,700. What do you think the future looks like? So, 1/3 of cars and light trucks, and not just that, but other vehicles too, I should add that, will be electric by 2040. 1/3 more energy productivity. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one. We know that economies become more energy productive. We know that the rate has accelerated. It's fluctuated a bit in the last year. That's not controversial, frankly, to say the global economy will be more energy efficient. Just one point. The mainstream economists are missing it. Again, this is PJM, one of the electricity networks in the US. The forecast from 2008, 2009, 10, and so on. Everywhere in the world, developing countries, developed countries, convention says it's all going to grow. Actually, what we see is energy efficiency and energy productivity in the economy, and it doesn't grow as fast as you'd think. So, I hope I've achieved at least the first goal, or maybe the first two, maybe some vocabulary so that you can talk about, do you agree with statement A and statement B, and maybe a shared view of the 3/3 world. Let's look at some of the implications. Coal. Coal has peaked. It's not coming back. Capacity factors in coal plants around the world. Everywhere I talk, capacity factors dropping. People shutting plants if they're old, not building them, cancelling them off the plans. They're building, of course, still, but not as many as they thought by a long chalk. In the EU, one country stands out. It's the dirty man of Europe. It's the UK. That's coal consumption of the top 10 coal consumers. The UK is the only one that so far has meaningfully reduced coal use. And this is the future history of coal around the world. From the Industrial Revolution to 2025, coal in the UK. You can see general strikes. You can see the miners' strike. By 2025, there'll be no more coal used in power generation in the UK. And where the UK goes, others are going to be following, and already are following, even China. This is China. Coal, top right, is going to be forced out. India, the cost of solar power is now cheaper than coal in this country. That's not some tree hugger. That's the Minister of Mines and Energy. He's now moved on. He's the Minister of Transport. And then there's the US. The war on coal, coal plant retirements through till the end of President Obama's term. That's President Trump's term so far. Do you know how many new coal-fired power stations are being built in the US? 0. 0. Coal's not coming back. Coal jobs. They dropped precipitously. They stabilized. Coal prices came up. But you can see there around 50,000 people. The stabilization, by the way, happened under President Obama. It's not because of anything done by this administration. Scott Pruitt, the EPA, since the fourth quarter of last year until most recently, we've added almost 50,000 jobs in the coal sector. Data. I don't see it. There are only 50,000 jobs. I don't want to call anybody a liar. Bill Koch. You've all heard of Bill Koch. The coal business in the United States has kind of died. So if you don't trust your government to tell you what's happening, trust Bill Koch. Gas. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you a lot about gas. That would be a very foolish thing to try. You know much more about this than I do. This is US data, number of rigs, down sevenfold, output per new well up sevenfold in that 10-year period. Unbelievable disruption through unbelievable innovation, which should be praised because this is gas we all use. It keeps homes warm. We should be giving credit, all of us, both sides, statement A and statement B, should be proud of this. And we can see what's happening in gas, big picture. 4 periods, 4 eras, the good old days. Gas prices linked to oil, etc. The boom-bust period, 2005 to 2010, volatile, difficult times. The great divergence. Do you remember the US was going to reindustrialize because only the US had cheap gas? You remember that? Well, what happened? LNG, innovation, business model innovation, new pipelines. Pipelines, I understand that's a bit of a hot button issue here. And that's where we are now. There are still price differences, but we're not back to the previous eras. And we're going to see this around the world. There is enough gas, and there is enough LNG capacity, and the world is going to have affordable gas. Does it mean the world's electricity system is going to go to gas? No, because the renewables are cheaper. The gas will be used for balancing, for flexibility, not for bulk supply. And at the other end, the batteries are going to eat the short-term balancing. Anything up to half an hour, maybe a few hours, is going to go to demand response and balancing. It's not going to go to gas. Gas is vital, but in the role of flexibility. Use the gas for what the gas is good at, and only the gas is good at. Oil. All of those electric vehicles, in terms of oil demand, you could say, well, maybe it doesn't amount to a hill of beans. Well, it's just starting to amount to the tiniest hill of beans. 300,000 barrels a day, just measurable in the statistics. It's mainly those buses. But it's going to start to matter. Again, going back to the conventional forecast, go back before the year 2000, there's 100 million barrels a day. Demand is just going to grow. We're going to blow through 100 million barrels a day, and that's that. Can't lose in the oil business. 2000 to 2007, demand's going to grow, not quite as fast as we thought, but it'll go through 100 million barrels a day. Can't lose money in the oil business. 2010 to 2017, well, still growing, much, much slower. And I presented this in 2015 and said, you know what? If we keep being more efficient with our vehicles and we shift to electric, why couldn't we see that? Peak demand around 2025, maybe shortly thereafter, and it was a big controversial thing to say, and it's now an orthodox point of view. What does it do to price? I want to introduce you to the world's best oil price forecaster, Bubbles the chimp. If you know what the oil price is going to be, you should be trading it right now and not here. But what we do know is that if the price drops, there'll be enormous demand, and there'll be that cheap oil will be absorbed. It will make its way onto the market. There will need to be further exploration, and the prices will be pushed up. Conversely, if the price surges, demand will be destroyed. There'll be more unconventional oil extracted. There'll be substitution, EVs or other things, mobility choices, kids sharing using mobile phones, all of us sharing using mobile phones. So we know that there's a fair way. You're going to be fine in oil, but there are implications. Don't expect a very high price. Don't expect a very low price either. Nuclear. This was at one point my most popular tweet ever. It says, for those who can't read it, breaking, first picture of UK's Hinkley C nuclear power station. The current generation of nuclear technology has been tested to economic destruction. I'm not going to say much about what might happen next because I'm chairing a panel tomorrow, but there is a whole generation of new nuclear solutions, and they can be fail-safe and they can be modular, and if they can be cheap, they will be game changers, and if they cannot be cheap, then they won't. Climate. Now, Holly, we started by talking about my Olympic career, so I'm a risk taker. This is actually me. My kids think I can still do this. I got bad news for them. I can still do that, but I can't land anymore. But I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to talk about climate here in Alberta, and I know it's a hot button, it's really hot button issue. But we've got to look at data and science. The planet is warming. This is not controversial science in any way. There are data points that are argued with, but this has been confirmed time and again, including by studies funded by Bill Koch. The Berkeley Earth Science project confirmed nothing to do with urban heat islands and so on. This is observed warming. Now, why is it happening? Is it the Earth's orbit? No. Is it the sun? Those sunspots, we read all about it. This cycle and that cycle and Milankovitch. You cannot reproduce that trend by using the sun as a driver. Is it volcanoes? No. Is it all natural factors? No. Is it humans? Deforestation? No. Ozone? No. Contrails, particulates? No, the opposite. Oh, look. Greenhouse gases, all human factors combined. Now, I'm doing this, I stand here as a scientist, not a climate scientist, but a scientist. I'm a thermodynamics geek. I also stand here as a conservative. And it is not responsible to look at this and say it's not happening. You can dislike the policy prescription. You can disagree with what might happen next. You can disagree with the cost. There's a lot of things you can debate and discuss, come at it from those two sides, but you cannot say this isn't happening. That is not conservative and it is not responsible. Donald Trump, famously, concept of global warming. You're going to believe that. Or James Mattis, climate change is impacting stability in areas of the world where our troops are operating today. I know who I would believe. You don't believe James Mattis? How about the Pope? We're presently witnessing a disturbing warming of the climatic system. And you know, the Pope, he has sources that we don't all have access to. So I've blown up the sound system, sorry about that. So it's happening. It is not responsible, it is not true conservatism to deny science. The Paris Agreement says we have to be net CO2 neutral in the second half of the century, between 2050 and 2100. If your model of decarbonization is everything's going to go electric and the electricity is going to go clean, this is the emissions intensity of power generation, just power generation. On the current trend, it would take 150 years to decarbonize entirely, just power generation. But it would take 332 years to electrify the global energy system. How are we doing? Let's look at it a different way. Here you've got all of energy on one chart. Renewable energy at the top, no carbon emissions, variability, etc. Down at the bottom, coal, bottom left, oil, bottom right, carbon intensive. Nuclear and natural gas, lower carbon, but have their issues. 1975, the size of the Pentagon is proportional to the energy footprint. 1980, 1985, 1990, you see nuclear being built out, but now you see China and coal starting to make its play. 1995, 2000, 2005, 2010. The X in the middle is the change in the center of mass of what we do, the average unit of energy. It hasn't moved. 2015, 2020, the IEA's short-term forecasts, which are very, very reliable, it hasn't moved. 2040, that's what the IEA says, the new policy scenario, that's BNEF, Bloomberg New Energy Finance. On this scale, it doesn't make any difference. Nothing's moving. IEA sustainable development, compatible with 2 degrees. We need to see some big shifts by 2040. But here's the real killer. After 2040, what do we need to see? That's an example of where we need to be by 2050 or 2100 to be fully decarbonized. That's the scale of the change. That's the scale of the opportunity. That's the disruption. By the way, it's not all bad news with climate. This is Mar-a-Lago. 2016, 2030, 2045. President Trump's kids are more worried about climate change than him. Alberta, some implications. If you're with me so far, if I haven't lost you, nobody's thrown bottles at me yet, so I'm going to keep going. Some implications for Alberta. Clearly, we're going to see a world where oil is still used, where gas is still used. It is perfectly morally acceptable to continue to supply that demand. Perfectly morally responsible. But economically, given that oil is going to peak and come down, you better be a low-cost producer. Can you do that? I know it's oil sands, but so what? You innovate. Can you be the low-cost producer? And can you be the high-responsibility producer as well? This is Eldar Cetre from Statoil, committed to long-term value creation. He's operating in a country that is committed to be carbon neutral by 2030 in Parliament. And by the way, they've created a sovereign wealth fund of over $1 trillion in the process. You have to be low cost, high responsibility to survive and prosper. The other thing is, the three-third world doesn't get us there. There are enormous other areas of opportunity: shipping and air freight, manufacturing, chemicals, agriculture, energy access, and a huge one, heat. This is the UK. Blue is heat demand.
red is electricity demand. How do we deal with that seasonality? Do you know anything about heating in Canada? Just asking. I visited Drake's Landing in Okotoks yesterday. Heated all year round by solar power, less than half an hour's drive from here. It's not the solution, it's very expensive. But my goodness, what innovation, the software they've developed. Innovation in heat is cool. I'm announcing it now. This is the next frontier of innovation. Solar, wind, batteries, heat. Let heat compete to stabilize the grid. Hydrogen for vehicles, for your average car, is a really stupid idea. Battery electric, electricity to wheel, 60% efficient. Hydrogen, 32% efficient. If you have electricity and you want to go somewhere, stick the electricity in a car. Don't waste half of it turning it into hydrogen and back into electricity. But hydrogen in industry, hydrogen in heating, hydrogen in seasonal storage, now we're talking. Are there any companies in oil and gas that might be able to help with that? Huge opportunity. Saudi Arabia, an example of a country that is starting to lean into these changes. 9-gigawatt plan, over $100 billion plan. If the region gets connected, solar power that can be produced in Saudi Arabia can be exported all the way to Europe. By the way, when he said this, the largest solar plant in Saudi Arabia was in the car park of Saudi Aramco. But you've got to start with a vision. Digitization. Any companies in Alberta any good at blockchain, at information technology? Because there's going to be ubiquitous chips and sensors. Everything's digital. Everything's connected. Ubiquitous communications, processing in the device, processing in the cloud, and machine learning, big data, and of course, blockchain, which is not on here, and it should be, or not explicitly. Huge opportunities. So, over the next 2 days, don't stick to text A, this is going to go away, we have to resist it, or text B, all this is going to be easy. Engage. Talk to people you don't agree with. Because the one thing we know in this energy city, this energy province, if you want things to stay as they are, everything will have to change. Thank you.